Hello class, I'm your instructor, Dr. Josh Redstone, and on today's very special episode of Philosophy of the Paranormal, I'm going to tell you all about how to write your essay topic proposal and your final essays. Alright, let's get into it. So a lot of my students have been asking me about the essay assignment, which of course functions as the final exam in this class. And together with the final essay, there is also an essay topic proposal component. It's really a separate assignment, not really a component of the essay assignment, but it is important. It's worth 12.5% of your grade, and of course it's due quite soon, on July 31st at 11:59 p.m. A lot of you have been asking me about this, about what is expected and what you're meant to do for an essay topic proposal. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the specifics of the essay assignment. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to approach writing an essay. Now, most of this will come in handy when you actually write the full essay, but most of it will also be handy when it comes to writing your topic proposals as well. So don't just watch the first few minutes of this and then, forget about the rest until it's time to start working on your final paper. Watch the whole video, because even the things I say about the final essay assignment will be important when it comes to putting together a good essay topic proposal. All right, so let's look at the proposal first, and then we'll turn our attention toward the essay assignment. Of course, as I already mentioned, and as it says in our course outline, the essay topic proposal is due on July 31st at 11:59 p.m. You'll be submitting it on Brightspace, and of course it's worth 12.5% of your final grade, which is a significant enough percentage of your final grade. And also, this is meant for Carrie and I to provide feedback before you go and write the final paper. So we can make sure that you're all on the right track and that you all have a good idea of what you're doing. And if we see maybe one proposal is going in the wrong sort of direction, we can steer you in the right direction before you go and write the final paper. So this is designed, for your benefit. So it's very good to do this, to do it well. But even if you don't do the proposal as well as you'd like, you'll get lots of feedback so that you can write a really great essay. Now, your topic proposals don't have to be very long. I've written here that they should be 2 to 3 paragraphs in length. You can go over that if you want. Don't go any longer than a critical response. So don't go over 750 words, excluding, of course, your bibliography. Make sure also to include all the important student information, your name, your student number, the due date, all that stuff that you usually do on any other assignment, do it here. And if you want, try and come up with a nice catchy title for your proposal, something that captures the main theme or the main topic of your paper that you will go on to write. What's very important that you do successfully on the proposal is clearly state the topic or area of interest that your paper will deal with, and that you identify what exactly it is you are going to be arguing, or what research question you are going to try to answer in your paper. And this can be fairly simply done, right? In one paragraph, you can say, my area of interest is ESP and psi phenomena. So my paper will concern ESP perhaps, and I will argue that ESP doesn't exist. There you go. That's quite simple. I want you to say more than that. Explain why you're interested in this topic that you've chosen. What is your motivation for wanting to look into this further? Identify a thesis or a research question, and of course tell me what you will argue and how you are going to do it. I'll get into some more detail about how to do that in a moment, but that's the really important thing you want to do in 2 to 3 paragraphs. Rather like the critical responses, this is fairly open-ended. There are many ways that you could clearly communicate to me what you want to talk about in your paper, what you will argue, how you will conduct your research, and so on and so forth. Just make sure that however you do it, it's clear what your area of interest is, what your thesis or research question will be, and basically why you're interested in this, and how you want to proceed with the paper, and how you envision the final paper. And of course, you also want to include a preliminary bibliography. You're going to use this to tell me about whatever sources you've identified thus far that you might want to include as references in your paper. It doesn't have to be an annotated bibliography. In other words, you don't have to give the source and then explain to me what it is. You can do that if you want, but you don't have to. I just need to know that you have some sources identified so that you're on the right track for finding sources. And perhaps I can even recommend some sources that I know about which might be relevant to your research paper. So, include a bibliography, even if it's only one or two sources, even if it's only my lectures so far. I mean, you should be doing more research than that for the final paper. But even if that's where you're starting from, include that. And perhaps I can recommend some additional sources. Right, so essentially, when it comes to writing your proposal, you need to do a few different things. You need to identify your area of interest, and you need to do it clearly and concisely. Your area of interest could be anything that we've covered in class, like ESP, parapsychology, UFOs, astrology, or it could be something that we haven't covered in class, but still counts as paranormal or supernatural or something like that. Right? So you need to identify that area of interest, and then you need to identify a research question or a thesis statement. A research question is what it sounds like. It is a question that you will answer by doing some research, right? So a research question could be as simple as, does ESP exist? That's a research question. Then you can conduct some research, read some papers, some books, some meta-analyses, and you can come to a conclusion that it does or does not exist, and your paper is going to be an effort to argue for the answer to that research question, right? You can come up with a thesis statement too. A thesis statement is like a statement that encapsulates what you are going to argue. That's what a thesis is, an argument. So you might have a thesis statement, if you're interested in ESP, you might say something in your thesis statement like, I will argue that ESP can be explained as a non-phenomena. So ESP isn't a thing, basically. And then you can explain and clarify your thesis statement, and that will work as a sort of bridge between your research question and thesis statement and your sort of plan of attack for the paper that you will write, which you need to describe to me in your proposal. Now, you can do one or the other or both. You could have a research question. Does ESP exist? And then your thesis statement is like the answer to your research question. ESP does not exist could be a thesis statement, although you should write it with a little more flair than that. What else? You don't have to frame your thesis with a research question. You can frame it in other ways. You could give a little bit of historical background, in the 19th century, interest in psychical research was high, which eventually gave way to parapsychology. And parapsychology, of course, studies psi phenomena like ESP. But does ESP exist? I guess I've slipped a research question in there. But you see what I mean. You can frame your thesis statement in many different ways. That was just a very sketchy kind of historical, like, we were researching this since this time, and here's how everything's kind of gone in a couple words. But do these phenomena really exist? In this paper, I will answer this question, or I will argue that, blah, blah, blah. You see what I'm saying, I'm sure. Once you've given a research question and or a thesis statement and told me a little bit about it, kind of elaborated on why you want to study or research this particular topic, or why this question is an interesting one that deserves scholarly attention, And when I say, describe why you're interested in this, I'm not saying I'm not saying why you're personally interested in it. You can tell me that, but tell me also why it would be good to answer this question, or why it would be interesting if your argument were true. You know, what is the import of your area of interest and the questions you're trying to answer. Make sure you communicate a little bit about that as well. After that, you want to tell me your plan for your paper, roughly. And I understand that papers will change. As you're writing a paper, you know, the final product often ends up different than the project you might have envisioned in your head, right? Nonetheless, I want to know how you're going to do the research, do the work. What's your plan of attack for this paper, right? How will you use the evidence and the sources that you've gathered, or what other sources are you going to go and look for? What kinds of research will you do? How will you construct your argument? You know, give me a kind of sketch of your plan of attack for this final paper in your essay topic proposal. So that's pretty much everything that's unique to the essay topic proposal. I'll talk about the essay now, and then I'll talk about writing an essay. When I get back into the details about writing and constructing arguments and doing research and citing sources, that stuff is going to be just as handy for the essay topic proposal as it is for the final paper. So keep that in mind as you're watching this. All right, so let's take a look at the details of the essay assignment now. Now, as it says in the course outline, all your essay assignments are due on August 25th at 11:59 p.m. You'll be submitting them on Brightspace, and of course this is the last day of the exam period, and your essay is functioning here like a take-home exam. That's why it's due on the last day of the exam period. The essay is of course worth 25% of your grade in this class. Now, I have been very accommodating due to COVID when it comes to late term work. You know, like if somebody's got their shot, they're feeling a little under the weather, or maybe even, you know, just life is kind of getting you down at the moment, I'll be pretty flexible with deadlines and I won't give any late marks. But when it comes to this is the final exam. You will be penalized 10% per day unless you have spoken to me. I've said here in the slides, unless there are extenuating circumstances like illness or bereavement, or even if you're just having a moment, you know, end of the term, it's crunch time. Stress and anxiety can affect all of us in different ways. And if that means you're having trouble getting the work done, that's okay, but let me know, okay? You need to let me know. And I won't be mad, okay? I'm not going to bite your head off. But I will penalize you if you do not contact me and your work is late, because this is the final exam, okay? But don't be afraid, if you're not going to get it done, don't be afraid to let me know. I will help work with you, okay? We can set up a deferral or whatever. So don't be afraid to get in touch with me if you're worried about this happening. So how about the format of your essay? Well, it should be typed, obviously, double space, 12-point font, or 11, depending on, I guess, which font you're using, Times Roman or Calibri or whatever. You'll want to submit your essays in MS Word format, so, you know, the doc file extension, or docx, if you like. I'm pretty flexible with the length. I think you should shoot for something between 2,000 and 3,000 words, not including the bibliography or if you have a title page. Those don't count towards your word limit. Definitely do not go over 3,000 words, okay? 3,000 words you should think of as the upper limit. Probably a good length to aim for here is 2,000 to 2,500 words. And of course, your essay must include a bibliography, give it a catchy title, and you must cite all of your work properly. Citing your work is so important in university because if you don't cite your work properly, you may be committing plagiarism, and plagiarism is a serious violation of the academic integrity standards, you know, at the university level. So you absolutely need to make sure you're citing things correctly, and I've kind of already been pointing this out in the critical responses. You know, I'm seeing things not being cited correctly, I'm letting you know, you got to cite this properly. I will be a lot harder on this in the final paper because I've told you, many times to cite your work. So you want to do that so that you avoid plagiarism. What kind of things count as plagiarism? Well, according to Carleton University, if you reproduce or paraphrase portions of someone else's published or unpublished material, regardless of the source, and you present these ideas as your own without properly referencing or citing the original source, that is plagiarism. If you submit a take-home examination, an essay, or anything like that, that's written in whole or in part by someone other than you, because there is no group assignment in this class, that is plagiarism. If you use ideas or direct verbatim quotations or even paraphrased material or concepts or ideas without appropriately acknowledging the source, that is by citing it properly, that is plagiarism. If you use another's data or research findings, this is not really relevant here. You'd be citing, you'd have to cite data. It's not like you can get data from a buddy working in a lab that would be relevant to your paper here. At least I doubt that. But that would be plagiarism too if you did that. Failing to acknowledge sources through the use of proper citations when using another's works, or even failing to use quotation marks. I tell my students all the time, even if you're just paraphrasing rather than directly quoting, cite the source, just to make it clear whose ideas are yours and whose are not. If you hand in substantially the same piece of work for academic credit more than once, without prior written permission of the course instructor in which the submission occurs, that is plagiarism. So if you've written a paper for another class and you want to use a part of that paper in your paper for this class, you need my permission and you need the permission of the other professor. I'm okay with that. Okay, like I'll okay that, but you need permission. So you need to check with me if you're going to do that. And even students who do this rewrite, portions of the material that they're using again to make it better. So, you're probably going to be fine. But just ask permission if you're not sure. So you have to cite your work properly. And I don't care what citation style you use. You can use MLA, APA, Chicago, Harvard, IEEE, for goodness sake. I don't care what you use. I just want you to be consistent with the style that you pick. Use it properly. Don't switch from like MLA to APA halfway through your paper. Don't do your references page in like APA format and then have a bunch of Chicago style footnotes. Like, just be consistent. And to help you do this, use Purdue University's online writing lab, or Purdue University's OWL. There's a link in the slides here on slide number 8. I'll link it here in the video below. I'll link it on Brightspace. So there's no need to ask me questions on how to cite your work. All the information is on Purdue's OWL. So don't ask Carrie or myself, how do I do that? It's something that you can figure out by using this guide. So what kind of essay can you write? What could be a plan of attack for your paper? Well, these 4 different ways of kind of, classifying different ways you can write a paper will help. I'll go over these 4 here on slide number 9. It'd be a good idea if you indicate what kind of paper, survey, positive argument, negative argument, or adjudicative, you're thinking of writing in your topic proposal. So of course you can write a survey paper. A survey paper is exactly what it sounds like. You just survey a topic by outlining a particular area, a particular field, whatever. The paper we read by Hyman earlier in this class is a pretty good example of a survey paper, right? Likewise with Blackmore's chapters. She doesn't do that much argumentation in them. She does some, but most of what she does is surveying. Surveying important ideas or important information underneath a particular area of interest. Now, you are required to answer a research question or have an argument. So your paper is not going to be entirely a survey paper. But any good paper has a survey element to it, where you'll have a bit of a literature review section. So if you've picked the topic of ESP, for example, you might want to review the literature on ESP, starting from psychical research up until the present time, right? You'd want to review some examples of research in that area. So any good paper should have a bit of surveying going on in it. You could also have a positive argument, which is where you're arguing for a particular position. So you might argue, yes, there is evidence for ESP, so that would be a positive argument, or you could do a negative argument. No, there is not evidence for ESP. That's a negative argument. So it's basically positive is arguing for a particular position, a negative argument is arguing against a particular position. Probably most of the papers that we'll see will take that form. But you can also write an adjudicative paper. An adjudicative paper is when you adjudicate between two or more different positions. So does ESP exist? These scholars say yes, but these ones say no. Who's right? What are the evidence? What is the evidence that side number 1 presents, and what's the evidence on side number 2's side? Let's talk about it. Let's adjudicate between these options. That's another way you can approach your paper, another sort of plan of attack that you can take. So let me know which one you're thinking of doing in your essay topic proposal. Now, because this is a second-year class, I feel like I've got to talk about the 5-paragraph essay. You probably all remember the 5-paragraph essay, right? Apparently, it is still being taught in secondary school in Canada. I guess, it's a decent enough teaching tool. It consists of an introductory paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, and a concluding paragraph. But I must emphasize, this is just a teaching tool, and that is something that I don't think is emphasized enough when the 5-paragraph essay is actually taught. People think that you just write 5-paragraph essays in university. No, you do not. Absolutely do not ever submit a 5-paragraph essay in a university. That would be like submitting a page from a coloring book for an art class. A 5-paragraph essay is a teaching tool, nothing more. So there shall be no 5-paragraph essays in my class. Yes, your essay will need an introductory paragraph and a concluding paragraph, or perhaps 2 intro paragraphs and 2 concluding paragraphs. It depends. But don't limit yourself to 3 paragraphs in the body. You are going to need to write a lot more than that to hit the word limit or the word count requirements for this essay. You want to use as many paragraphs as necessary to do that, and each paragraph should function like a step in your argument. Each paragraph should concern its own topic. There should be one central idea that ties everything you say in one paragraph together, and the next paragraph should be about something else. I've seen a few examples of the opposite where, I'm getting critical responses that are just, they're 750 words long, but they're one giant paragraph, and they need to be separated into multiple paragraphs. And you do that by making sure that, you treat certain ideas in one paragraph, different ideas in another. Each paragraph has a different job that it does in your paper. It's like a stage or a step in your whole argument. So make sure to break up your work into small paragraphs. This keeps it clear and readable. But don't limit yourself to 5 of them, okay? Always remember, this goes for everything you do in university, really, from small critical responses to big research papers to your doctoral thesis, if you ever go on to write one. The purpose of doing this is to present and defend an argument. So that's why you have to choose a thesis. A thesis is like, thesis, as I said earlier, means argument. And what I like to do is think of a thesis as like a main theme and a position that you are taking toward that theme or toward that idea or that claim or whatever it is that you've chosen. And usually we can find our thesis in a thesis statement, which is a single sentence or maybe 2 or 3 sentences tops that conveys your thesis, that conveys what you will argue. Argument here, of course, doesn't mean like rah, 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 a fight with your friends or family, right? An argument is an attempt to convince someone else of the correctness of your thesis, to convince somebody that what your argument, your argument is right, and your argument needs to include things like evidence and sound reasoning, to convince somebody that you are correct in your position. So a thesis, again, just to kind of summarize all that, I think of a thesis as a position toward, a theme, a claim, a question. A thesis is really like the argument you're going to present, and when you're arguing, what you're doing is trying to convince somebody of your position using evidence, using reason, not opinion, not feeling, using evidence and sound reasoning. And that is very important. Of course, this isn't like a logic class or a critical thinking class, but something that you should know about arguments is that they usually consist of premises and conclusions. Like a proper philosophical argument has premises and a conclusion. And the premises should be true, and the conclusion needs to follow from the premises. You don't have to structure your paper this way, right? You don't have to go like P1, P2, P3, conclusion. You don't have to do that. But you do need to make sure that what you say is true, and that you have evidence to show that it's true, and that what you're actually arguing using that evidence follows from that evidence, or the conclusion of your argument follows from its premises. You really do need to make an effort to do that for an assignment like this. Your argument also should be straightforward, clear, and concise. You don't want to get overly complicated with the way you're describing things. And you want to make sure you use proper reasoning. You need to avoid logical fallacies. You need to avoid errors of reasoning. You need to avoid unclear writing. This is all very important when it comes to building an argument in favor of your thesis statement. Of course, you can also pick a research question. A research question is a question, as I mentioned earlier, that you will answer in your essay. You still need to argue your position. So a research question is just kind of like a different way to do a thesis statement, You can just have a thesis statement. In this paper, I will argue that, X, Y, and Z. But a research question is an interesting way to frame that, Is it true that X, Y, and Z? In this paper, I will present evidence that X, Y, and Z are false, something like that. It's all just a different way to frame your research question and kind of give structure to your discussion. Because remember, writing an essay is kind of a narrative exercise. It's almost like telling a story. So that's something else you'll want to keep in mind, this sort of narrative component of constructing an essay. So of course, your essay needs to have some structure. You need to have an introduction where you'll introduce the topic that you're discussing. You're going to state your thesis or your research question. You're going to describe how your essay will proceed. First I will consider, the research of psychical researchers. Then I will move on to look at the work of the Rhines and later parapsychologists. And finally, I will turn to modern studies in anomalistic psychology to demonstrate that ESP is a non-phenomena. You might say something like that in your paper, right? Then you're going to move on to the body. This is where you're actually going to present arguments for your thesis. This is where you're going to do a bit of lit review if you want to. Always do the lit review right after the introduction, then do your lit review, and then get to arguing. And remember, each paragraph in the essay needs to do something. It should be a step in your argument. It can explain one of your premises. It can explain a piece of evidence. If you're still in the lit review section, one paragraph per piece of evidence that you're reviewing, perhaps, or one paragraph per study. Keep it organized in this way to help your essay remain clear and concise. And then in the conclusion, you want to summarize everything. You want to tie it all together. Restate your thesis or perhaps your research question and state your conclusion. Your conclusion is a lot like a reformulated thesis statement. You know, you might re-summarize all the evidence and the steps you've taken in your arguments and then say something like, I therefore conclude that ESP is not a real phenomenon. So, you know, that's what you want to do. A conclusion is a lot like a rewritten introduction. And in fact, I recommend write the body first and then write the intro and conclusion. You can write a little bit of an intro just to kind of keep you focused, but you'll want to rewrite the intro and conclusion when the body of your essay is done. And then you'll want to edit the whole thing and make it nice and readable. What kind of language should you use in an essay or an essay topic proposal? Well, some classes, you know, they have profs who don't like people using the first person pronoun I, things like this. They want to sound very smart and very fancy. I don't know where this comes from, because even in philosophy journals, people use the first person pronoun all the time. People use funny examples. People write less formally than you would expect them to in these publications. So I don't mind if you do that too. But you should stay away from colloquialisms and things like that. You know, don't start telling me how, you know, ESP is lit, or you know, parapsychology is fire. That's too colloquial, right? But you can say things like, I believe that parapsychology is an exciting area of research. You know, you can say that. You can use the first person pronoun and say that way. Whatever you do, use plain, simple language. Do not try and sound smarter or to make your paper sound smarter by using overly complicated language. Most of the students whose work I read who try to do this, and I'm sorry to say this, if they try and sound smart by using bigger words, they kind of end up sounding less smart, shall we say? As Albert Einstein said, you want to keep things as simple as possible, but no simpler. You don't want to use jargon and overly complicated language. You want simple, clear, concise language, because that helps the reader, who is an uninformed, intelligent but uninformed layperson, understand your argument. So, when it comes to the writing and editing of your paper, use a dictionary, use a thesaurus. These are valuable resources. They will help you, you know, if you're deciding whether to use a big, smart sounding word, whether you are actually using the correct word, okay? And word choice can really, if you make the wrong word choice, it can really obfuscate your writing, okay? So make sure to use the right words. You can use the first person pronoun. So in this paper, I will argue. You can use the third person pronoun. This essay will argue that, or this author will argue that. You could even use the royal we if you want to sound super fancy. You could say, we will argue in our paper that X, you know? So be careful of the way you use language. Be careful to use punctuation correctly. Semicolons is a big thing here. People use semicolons wrong. People don't close quotation marks correctly. Make sure you're using this stuff properly. Watch out for comma splices. I'm seeing a lot of comma splices in the critical responses. Watch out for those. If you don't know what any of this is, by the way, just Google it. Watch out for sentence fragments. Watch out for run-on sentences. Watch out for problems with parallelism. You know, these are all grammatical issues, sentence structure issues that an A+ paper will not have any of these, you know? So you need to really watch out for them, because the best papers are the papers that communicate their ideas clearly, and a big way to do that is to make sure that your writing is done correctly. So watch out for problems with grammar, spelling, sentence structure, punctuation. Be very careful of all of that. You're writing this using Microsoft Word, so, you know, use the grammar and spell check features of Microsoft Word to make sure that the language is good in your paper. So some other do's and don'ts to keep in mind for your proposal and for the final paper. Do's first, write for an intelligent layperson, somebody who's smart but who doesn't necessarily know the field. Pretend that I don't know the field of, you know, philosophy of the paranormal, and you're telling me something I don't know. I'm a smart guy, but I don't know anything about the paranormal. So assume that when you're writing for, you know, writing your papers for this class. Assume I don't know anything, but don't dumb it down. You know, don't dumb things down, but don't get overly complicated, like I said before. You need to strike a balance, just clear, concise language that a smart person could understand. Use inclusive language too. You know, you can use he or she or one instead of exclusively using, you know, he throughout the paper if you're referring to some imaginary person. Use humanity rather than mankind, because it is humanity, you know. It's not really mankind anymore. The gender neutral man just isn't a thing in the English language anymore. So use humanity. Be mindful also of technical terms, you know. A lot of people in a philosophy class will use words like idea or concept or form or any number of things, just kind of willy-nilly the way we use them in everyday life. But it's important to remember that words like this, among many of the other terms we've learned so far, are technical terms in philosophy, and you need to use them correctly. You know, if you say something like the concept of the paranormal, you have to be aware that in philosophy, concept is a mental item, a mental building block. It's not what we mean in the everyday when we employ the word concept in everyday vernacular. So when you're talking about the concept of the paranormal, you'd have to actually make sure you're talking about someone's concept of the paranormal, literally their sort of mental blueprint of the paranormal, right? And that's just one example. Be mindful to use technical terms the right way, because I will dock marks if they're used incorrectly, because again, this will make your writing less clear. A few don'ts, you know, don't caricature things. Don't commit like the straw man fallacy, right? You know, don't set up a weaker version of the argument you're perhaps arguing against and then knock it down. You know, avoid caricatures, sweeping generalizations. Avoid way too general statements as well. You know, statements like, since the beginning of time, or since the dawn of man. These are ways that undergraduate students sometimes begin papers, and it's the wrong way to begin a paper. I mean, we haven't been doing anything since the beginning of time. Time began when the universe began, like 14 billion years ago or whenever. Humans are a recent arrival in the universe compared to the origin, you know, the date of the origin of the universe. So do not say since the beginning of time. You know, since the beginning of time we have wondered about the paranormal. No, we haven't. We weren't around at the beginning of time. Or since the dawn of man. Well, no. At the dawn of man we were hunting and gathering. And also, it's not man, it's humanity. So don't make sweeping general statements like this, okay? Good. You want to make sure you use phrases correctly. A lot of people say, this begs the question, for example, you know? Begging the question is actually one of those technical terms. Begging the question is a logical fallacy in philosophy. It's a type of informal logical fallacy. So if you're talking about you know, something raising a question, then say raises the question. Don't say this begs the question, because that's actually a technical term that you're probably not employing right. You know, if you say something like, many people believe in ESP, but this begs the question, is ESP real? That's not how we use that. Begging the question is an informal fallacy, as I said, that basically involves a form of like circular argumentation, you know? Like the Cartesian circle, just to use an example, René Descartes, you know, how do I know, Descartes asks, how do I know God exists? Well, because I have a clear and distinct idea of God. Well, how can you trust your clear and distinct ideas? God made my clear and distinct ideas clear and distinct, so I can trust them. That's called the Cartesian circle. It's a circular argument. You know, it's like, how do you know God exists? It says in the Bible. Well, how do you know the Bible is true? It's inspired by God, of course. It's fine if you believe that, but, you know, one does not support the other. That's begging the question. So that's a technical term. Use raises the question if you are going to talk about the raising of a question, okay? Watch out for other phrases like myriad things. A lot of people say a myriad of things. No, it's myriad things. What are some others? I mean, I guess we're also talking about using basic words correctly as well, not just phrases. So, the difference between there, and there, or it's with an apostrophe and it's without an apostrophe. Then and than. You need to be careful to use the right word, or otherwise you're committing a grammatical blunder. What are some other tips and tricks that I can recommend? Well, you don't have to turn in like an airtight, bulletproof, genius level paper or anything to get an A+ in this class, but you do need to convince me. You need to offer a convincing argument. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. You need to use evidence and sound reasoning to convince me, or Carrie, the reader, of the correctness of your argument. While you're doing this, you want to make sure that your writing has a bit of a flow to it. I like this idea of flow. I borrow this idea actually from hip-hop. I'm not really much of a hip-hopperer, but I know that in like rap music, there's this idea of flow. And your paper should have a kind of a flow to it, the same way that a kind of like freestyle rap battle kind of has a flow to it. What I mean by that is you want, every paragraph to follow from the previous paragraph. Remember, every paragraph is a step in your argument. Every paragraph has a job to do, and the end of that paragraph should lead in a way that flows nicely to the next one. Just like a rapper spitting mad rhymes. You feel me? One of the ways that you can make sure your writing flows is that you can read your essay out loud to yourself, and this will help you catch any errors you've committed, spelling, grammar, punctuation. You will catch them if you, print it out, take a break from staring at it on a screen and print it out and read it out loud with a pen in your hand. You'll be surprised what this will do for you. You could also have a friend read over your paper and check for typos and grammatical mistakes and so forth. And because they're your friend, you'll want to take a look at their paper too and do the same for them. A fresh pair of eyes really helps with the editing process, and it will help you to have a paper that really flows very well if it's free of grammatical errors, spelling errors, punctuation errors, and so forth. You can also read examples of papers that you find online, but I recommend that you use extreme caution when doing this, because you may not know a good paper from a bad one. And some people accidentally commit plagiarism this way. They'll take a really amazing paper and use it as a blueprint and change bits and try to kind of rewrite it as their own paper. But that's plagiarism, because you're going to leave bits, you're human, you're going to forget about some bits that are still the same, and I'm going to catch you. So don't do that. Read papers, but if you want examples of papers that are good, I recommend the ones that we're reading in this class, not like other student work. Try to imitate what the scholars and scientists and philosophers, the papers that we've written that the papers that they've written that we've read. Try and imitate what they do, learn from the best. When it comes to sources for your paper, I absolutely recommend using the readings I've provided, my lectures, and my PowerPoint slides as a starting point. You can certainly cite all of those things, but you must also cite other sources. You're going to need to track down other academic papers or perhaps books. You can cite videos, documentaries if you like. Podcasts are acceptable, depending on what you're using the information for. I wouldn't cite a podcast or a YouTube video as evidence, for or against, any kind of, phenomenon that we're looking at, but I would cite them as examples of, say, belief in these phenomena. So you can do that. And of course, I'll offer recommendations where I can. If I'm aware of certain papers or authors, and I read your essay proposal and you say, I'd like to write more about cryptozoology, but I'm not sure where to start. Maybe I can point you in the right direction and recommend a source, you know? Avoid citing Wikipedia. Wikipedia, when I started out in university, you know, Wikipedia was still pretty slapdash. It's gotten a lot better. The articles are you know, not like scholarly quality, but some articles are really not half bad on Wikipedia. The problem is that anyone can edit it, right? And that's why we avoid citing Wikipedia. But you can go down to the references section of Wikipedia articles and identify interesting sources that way. You know, that way you're going right to the primary sources, which is good to do. So, and what's very important is that any evidence you find, you know, because this is a class about the paranormal, you're going to run into appeals to authority. You're going to run into anecdotal evidence. This needs to be treated critically. It needs to be treated with extreme skepticism. And remember, the reason why we are skeptical is not because we just want to rain on everybody's parade and go, rah, 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 the paranormal doesn't exist. We don't want to do that. No. What we want to do is subject our beliefs or potential beliefs to doubt. And if they survive that process, then we are more secure in our knowledge. That is why we are skeptical. We're not skeptical because we want to be mean. We're not trying to be jerks. You know, we're not trying to make fun of people who believe in the paranormal. We need to treat things with skepticism because if they survive that test, be it, you know, systematic doubt like a philosopher like Rene Descartes, or scientific method, that's also a kind of skepticism, kind of, you know, like skepticism, you know, that we can practice in a lab almost by trying to disprove our hypotheses. That is skepticism. That is doubt, with experimentation used to beef up our doubt, right? But we do that because we want to know what's true. So if things survive these skeptical tests, we can be more confident that they are true and they represent the way the world actually is. So that is why we are skeptical. And that is why you need to be skeptical and critical in your work for this class, including, of course, your essay proposal and your final essay. So I provided you with a lot of information today about the topic proposal and the essay assignment. So, you know, maybe this is a little bit of information overload and maybe you're not sure where to start now. So I recommend, if that's how you feel, that you try this. Take your area of interest, you know, whatever you're thinking about doing, and use that to try and frame your thesis statement or your research question. So let's stick with ESP. Perhaps you want to write a paper about ESP. So you want to come up with a research question, perhaps. It could be as simple as, does ESP exist? And you might frame your thesis statement in a way that it like works as an answer to your research question. So you could write, in this paper, I will argue that empirical evidence in support of the existence of ESP is not strong enough to warrant belief in ESP. That could be a thesis statement. You want to frame your thesis statement with some discussion too, you know, some like contour sentences, something that provides context for your paper, setting up to tell the reader, you know, what you'll be arguing and why, right? So sentences like this might be like, you know, something like, ESP has been studied since the late 19th century during the height of spiritualism, a movement which saw mediums claim they could communicate with the dead. This movement ignited interest in psychic powers, telepathy, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis among scientists and lay people alike. And then, you know, from there you can move on to get to ESP, which is what you actually want to talk about. So you might write, many scientists in the 19th century were convinced of the reality of such abilities, while others remained skeptical. You gradually narrow down to your research question and your thesis statement. While parapsychology emerged from the earlier discipline of psychical research and continued to study psi phenomena well into the 20th century, there is yet no convincing evidence for psi, including ESP. So I would try doing an exercise like this. Starting broad with your area of interest, and you know, your thesis research statement is like, you know, it's like an upside down pyramid, right? Your research question and thesis statement should be very narrow and concise, and you want to work your way from like introducing your area of interest and kind of setting the thesis statement in context and getting narrower and narrower and narrower until you, boom, you hammer down that thesis statement so the reader knows exactly what you're going to talk about and why you're going to talk about it. And then you'll move on to tell the reader how you're going to talk about it, introduce some lit review, discuss some evidence, and start actually making that argument. Now, maybe you've come up with an idea that doesn't fit with any of the areas that we've covered in this class so far. And that's okay. You know, that's why I'm having you do the essay topic proposals. Maybe you've come up with something that isn't strictly paranormal, but which is still kind of weird. You know, I had a student write about the Mandela effect last time I wrote this. Last time I taught this class, which you know, might seem kind of spooky or paranormal. I don't know how paranormal it actually is, but it's certainly a weird phenomenon, and this student wrote a very interesting paper on it. So I would be open to including things that are not strictly speaking paranormal or supernatural, but that are still kind of weird or deal with something anomalistic. So if people want to write about, like, say, conspiracy theories or you know, weird phenomena like the Mandela effect or the uncanny valley or something like that, that is 100% fine with me. Again, I'm having you do the essay proposal so that if you decide to do that, I can make sure to steer you in the best direction where you'll be able to write the best paper, right? Or if it really doesn't look like it's going to work, I can provide some feedback to help you maybe retool your approach and get you on track with something that will fit within the scope of the class. All right? So that's why we're doing the proposals, so that you can be as prepared as you can possibly be to hand in a really great paper. All right, everyone, so that is it for this very brief non-lecture. You know, this isn't really a lecture. I'm probably going to give it its own spot on Brightspace, along with all the essay stuff. So your submission portal for the proposal, for the final essay, this video, and I'll also have a small template that you can use if you wish for your proposal. It's going to be very simple. You know, it's just going to have the blank spaces for student info, a title. It's going to say, name your area of interest, thesis statement, put a plan for your paper here, put your references here. You know, it's going to be very simple. But I will make that available by the time this essay goes, by the time this video goes live. So that is it for all about the essay assignment and the essay proposal. I hope this helps you all prepare for it. And if you have any further questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next time for our next proper lecture. All right, bye for now, everyone.